we've got one more person, Ron Zeger, coming on. So good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our monthly MOPAG meeting. This meeting is being taped and it'll be viewed. You can view it in a couple of days at our website, mopag.net. Today, we hope to have presentations on the Missouri education disputes in the news of late, and that will be followed by an update on the current session of the Missouri legislature. But first, we'll take care of business. Christina, can we have a treasurer report, please?
Beginning of January, we had a balance in our checkbook of $1,331.13. We received some membership dues in $123.02. Act Blue does take their fees out. And then we wrote out a check to 2nd District Missouri Democrats for $300. So as of today, beginning of February, our checkbook balance is $1,154.15.
Thanks, Christina. Any questions on that? Okay. Are there any announcements that people would like to make? Just, you can raise your hand or speak out. No? Okay. I see Harvey Birdman just joined us. Harvey, do you have any announcements that you would like to make?
No, not at this time. Thank you.
All right. All right. I believe then it's time for election of officers to the MOPAG board. Susan Turk, would you like to take that on?
Sure. Okay. Let's see. We have 4 officers that we need to elect today, as well as 5 seats on the board of directors of MOPAG. Our officers are chair and co-chair, secretary, and treasurer. Currently, our chair is Steve Reed, our co-chair is me, Susan Turk, our secretary is Marty Walsh, and our treasurer is Christina Anderson. They are the nominees of the nominating committee. Are there any nominations from the floor for the position of chair? Well, in that case, may I close nominations for the position of chair? May I have a motion to do that? Somebody's raise your hand or
I so move.
I move.
okay.
I move that
Second.
the nominations be closed and we elect by acclamation.
Wait. You're getting ahead of things. Are there any nominees for the floor for the position of co-chair? If not, may I have a motion to close nominations for co-chair?
So moved.
Okay. Are there any nominations from the floor for the position of secretary? If not, may I have a motion to close nominations on secretary? Please.
I make a motion.
Second.
Okay. Any nominations from the floor for the position of treasurer? Okay, may I have a motion to close nominations for treasurer?
So moved.
Okay. So since there have been no nominations from the floor for any of the officer positions, I move that we elect the 4 officers by acclamation.
Second.
Is that a second? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, we've got officers. Now, we have 5 at-large positions on the board. Currently, they have been held by Ron Sager, Don Loeb, Don Logue, Al Gerber, and Rick LaMonica. We had 1 vacancy last year. Rick LaMonica has not gotten in touch and has not attended recent meetings, so I am assuming he doesn't want to continue on the board. We could, so we have 3 people standing for board, Don, Ron, and Al. There are 2 vacancies, as well as we could have more than 5 people running. Are there any nominations from the floor for positions on the board? And you can nominate yourself. Ron?
I nominate Ellen, Jacqueline, and Ann.
That's okay. Ellen, Jacqueline, and Ann Ross.
I have a
Ellen?
mouthful of food, but I decline. You said Ellen, right?
I did say
I
Ellen.
decline as well.
Ann declined. Jacqueline, would you accept a nomination?
I'm just joining this group, so I would have to wait and see.
We really could use a couple more board members. And I have to tell you, it's not a heavy lift. We basically make decisions about the agenda for meetings. We meet via Zoom. We a genial group. I would even say we're kind of fun. We do not meet monthly. We meet every 2 to 3 months. Try to plan more than 1 meeting at a time, so that we're not taking up a lot. It doesn't take up a lot of your time to be on the board. So are there any other nominations for people to serve on the board, or have any of the people who've declined rethought?
Susan, I'd
Yes.
like to nominate Ross Hunt.
Ross, would you accept the nomination? Unmute.
I got it. I need to know the post office box number to send in my dues. I think I've forgotten to send that in, so I may not be eligible. If I am eligible, then I would be willing to go on the board.
You are eligible, because dues don't, well, anyway. We don't have a hard and set deadline for when dues have to be in.
I see, okay.
Okay.
And how much are the dues?
It's $25, and the address has changed recently. We'll send you the new address.
And there's also an ActBlue account you can use as well to contribute.
You can just go to mopag.net to the donation button, and you'll see where you can do it by ActBlue or send a check in.
Yeah, the one thing I would add is that traditionally we've met on, when we have board meetings, it's on Sundays at 1 o'clock. And again, these have been Zoom meetings, so it's easy to attend.
It's usually the 3rd Sunday, so it wouldn't conflict with your nation group, Ross.
Oh, okay.
Are there any other
Susan, Jesse has her
nominations?
hand up.
What, Ron?
See, Susan, Jesse has her hand up.
Oh, Jesse,
Susan,
are you
Jesse.
nominating yourself? Please unmute Susan Jesse.
No, I'm not. I just had my hand up and I can't get it back down.
Jacqueline, is your hand up?
Yes. I would consider being on the board because Don's there.
Great, thank you.
Great.
Okay, well then we have 5 nominees for the board: Jacqueline, Ross, Al, Don, and Ron. Are there any other nominees? Then I will close nominations from the floor. And since we have 5 nominees for 5 positions, I would ask for a motion to elect everyone by acclamation.
So moved.
All in
Second.
favor? All in
Second.
favor? All in favor, signify by raising your hands or saying aye.
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 Like we have a board of directors. Thank you very, very much. And those of you who are new, welcome to the board. And have in the as they say in China, an interesting time this year. It may not be enjoyable, but it will be challenging. So thank you, everyone.
Okay, thank you very much, Susan. So today, we're very pleased that Representative MacKey, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, of the 87th District, very pleased that he's made time to come and talk to us today about the education disputes going on at local community levels and in Jefferson City. So I'm going to turn the Zoom floor over to you, Ian, if you are there. I see a screen that says Bob MacKey on it. And I'm assuming that is probably Ian's screen. But Ian's not there yet. He may just have stepped away for a while. So I think what we ought to do, Susan, is maybe until Ian shows up, go on to our next segment with Glenn to give us a MoLeg review.
Sounds good.
Glenn, if that's okay with you, and unless Ian has some time constraints, we might just go ahead and let Glenn finish his review and then go on to Ian.
Okay. I'm going to concentrate on 3 parts of what's going on in Jeff City. We could be here all week and not get much below the surface because it's a very interesting time in Jeff City. First, on the budget. You may remember the governor put forth a massive supplemental appropriation bill to cover Medicaid expansion, giving state workers a 5.5% raise, and also setting a floor of $15 an hour for full-time state employees. Unfortunately, the supplemental is getting caught up in politics. The budget chairman, for example, has decided that while some state workers deserve $15 an hour, it's too much for others. And so he's talking about $15 an hour for, say, correction workers, but some of the mental health workers would only get $12 an hour. This despite the fact the head of the Department of Mental Health has pointed out that at the Fulton facility, they're competing with a Dollar General warehouse that pays $17 an hour, literally right down the road. The supplemental budget is also controversial because it pays for Medicaid expansion. Despite the fact that voters approved it, despite the fact that the state dragged things out as long as they could, there are still Republicans in the legislature trying to defund Medicaid expansion. And in fact, that chair of the budget committee has a House Joint Resolution number 117 that would have the people of Missouri vote in November on whether to make adult Medicaid an appropriated item rather than an entitlement, What that would mean was if people would be dumb enough to vote for that, and they might, because they seem to vote for things like dirty Missouri, that would mean that Medicaid would have no guarantee for adults. It would depend on each year if the legislature was going to appropriate money for it and how much they were willing to give. That would be a disaster. It would cause all sorts of problems. It could cause Missouri's entire Medicaid program to be decertified by the feds. But the people in Jeff City are just stupid enough to try to do that. That's because right now, the state of Missouri is being held hostage by about 25 people, 8 senators, and about 16 House members in the conservative caucus. They're the ones like Mike Moon in the Senate who ran the campaign against the governor's choice to head the Department of Health and Senior Services. They're the ones who are holding up redistricting and everything else. Basically, the conservative caucus has just enough strength to stop a lot of things, which is really, really hurting what's going on for the legislature, especially on things like the budget. The supplemental budget is in danger. They need to pass the Medicaid part by the end of February to be safe. They really needed to pass the raises for state workers because, as we saw with the road crews, and by the way, the MoDOT workers already started $15.50. And even at $15.50, they can't hire enough people to drive trucks. If you saw in the news, the one person was explaining that MoDOT's paying $15.50, municipalities are paying $18 an hour, and private companies are paying $22 an hour to people with the same skills and a commercial driver's license. So that's why they didn't have enough plows to get a running start at the roads this time. On top of that, the regular budget is coming up. Now, for the first time in decades, Missouri has a lot more money than they know what to do with. Because of the pandemic, a lot of their costs went down. Because of the Federal CARES Act money, their income went up. If you ask the state treasurer about how much money Missouri has, he gets kind of fuzzy on the math. But nobody is arguing that, say, the supplemental bill proposed by the governor with the 5.5% raises is easily within what the state can afford to pay. Overall, year-to-date, general revenue is up about 2% right now. But the state has a lot of money in the bank, and because they have more dedicated road money coming through the fuel tax, and that'll go up later in the year and so on, their situation is not as grave as it's been in prior years. Despite that, one thing I know that Representative MacKey is going to point out is that they're still sticking to the formula on school funding. Their formula amount for school funding only raises the amount going to K through 12 education by a few $1 million this year. It is nowhere near the rate of inflation, and of course it hasn't been by what it should be for several years. My next category, I'm going to call generally bad crap. This is an election year. A lot of legislators are going to propose really bad bills for the simple reason they want to be able to put them on their campaign literature, whether they make it or not. We're seeing a bunch of bills. My favorite is Senate Bill 666. Now, Senate bills are assigned numbers randomly, but Senate Bill 666 has been called the Right to Murder Bill. It changes the burden of proof from a person who kills another person claiming self-defense from the person firing the gun. It goes beyond stand your ground. It puts the burden of proof on the prosecutor to show beyond a reasonable doubt that the person killing the other person was unreasonable, based on what that person's perception was of reality. So basically, somebody could be yelling at you in your front yard, and if you thought they were a threat to you and a potentially deadly threat, under Senate Bill 666, proposed by Senator you could take your deer rifle and drop them next to the mailbox. Believe it or not, that might pass. Even though it's going too far for the NRA and other groups. It's the same situation we saw a couple years ago with the Second Amendment Preservation Act. Nobody wants to say they were against a bill, but that increases self-defense or is pro-gun. We're also probably looking at guns in state universities on the students by next year. We're looking at more crappy anti-abortion language. We're looking at a lot of curriculum tainted materials, taint curriculum. For example, there is one legislator who doesn't think students should learn anything but the correct American history. So in other words, since Plymouth Rock on, everything's been hunky-dory. No Native Americans have ever been oppressed. No Japanese were interred in the desert during World War II. No African American ever had a fight for the right to vote. All that stuff would get slid under the table because that's not the history we want to teach. There's also a proposal to restrict how biology is taught to the point where if you teach evolution and if you teach traditional biology, you also have to give equal weight to intelligent design, i.e. creationism. There's a whole bunch of other bills. We're going to have January 12th being Rush Limbaugh Day, all sorts of things like that. Items being passed just so people have something for their campaign literature. And unfortunately, there's not much we can do about that because enough Republicans will go for that just because they don't want to look like they're against conservative religious Christian values. My third area, and probably the most complicated, is redistricting. As Harvey can tell us, they somehow managed on the House Commission created by Dirty Missouri to come to a deal. I still haven't figured out how they did that, but the House districts look like they're going to fly, and they're not bad. The Senate districts are still way up in the air. And the one map that's made it to the public proposed by the Republicans is crazy. It would have people who live just north of Westport Plaza in Maryland Heights in the same state Senate district as people on the southern end of Hannibal. It cuts St. Charles County into 4 state Senate districts. It does horrible things to St. Louis County. It does nasty things to minority areas in St. Louis County, St. Louis City, and Jackson County. And it also pretty well emasculates the idea of having a Democratic senator from Central Missouri for the next decade. But that map is still up in the air because that commission can't come to a compromise. And that's going to probably go to the court. And we don't know how that's going to turn out because this is all a new process. With the new Dirty Missouri Commission rules, this is the first time with them. We know in other states, because of Supreme Court decisions, we've seen judges being more tolerant of gerrymandering. That's something to consider. The big fight, though, right now, and the one that's tying up Jeff City in knots, is over congressional redistricting. Now, early on, the Republican establishment essentially put forth a 6-2 map, which keeps the status quo. A Democratic member of Congress from the 1st district and a Democratic member of Congress in the 5th district in Kansas City. Their map also eliminates some of the problems that Emanuel Cleaver's district had. In fact, that little salient going east on Highway 70 in the Lafayette County and so on. They cleaned that up some. The problem is the map that they proposed has a bunch of issues, especially with St. Charles County. For example, St. Charles County has 405,000 people. A congressional district is about 770. They break St. Charles County up between the 2nd and 3rd congressional district. Northern St. Charles County, starting at Lake St. Louis, all the way to the Mississippi River in West Alton, would be in the 3rd congressional district with Blaine Lichtenmeyer. That's the same district that would represent Jefferson County and Franklin County. that goes across northern St. Charles County in this weird wraparound. Now, Cori Bush's friends are not happy with the way they redrew the first district. The first district lost a lot of population and has to go west and either north or south. Cori Bush's people want to go more to the north by west, whereas the original map went more south into places like Shrewsbury and Afton. That is one thing that is hanging up some of the Democratic senators, trying to give Cori Bush the map that she wants. However, the bigger issue is what the Conservative caucus wants. Bob Onder, the leader of the Conservative caucus, lives in western St. Charles County. And guess what? He's one of those people pushed into the 3rd congressional district. We had heard about a year and a half ago that Bob Onder would like to work in Washington. He is not well liked by the Republican establishment, so nobody really thought it unusual that his house got pushed into the 3rd congressional district, which goes all the way out to Jefferson City area. However, Onder and the Conservative caucus, they don't want to just change St. Charles County. They want a congressional map that eliminates Emanuel Cleaver's district by slicing it up. In one of their proposed maps, Branson, Missouri would be in the same congressional district as the southern suburbs of Kansas City. They would slice up what is now Emanuel Cleaver's district into thirds or fourths so that there would be no Kansas City centered district. And Emanuel Cleaver, even though there's a large minority population between African Americans and Hispanics in his district, it's not a majority minority district the way it's calculated, and we're not sure how much Washington is going to push on that. And so a number of Republicans, led by the Conservative caucus, were pushing for a 7-1 map. 7 Republicans representing Missouri and 1 Democrat. If you go just by the votes for governor and president in 2020, Missouri should be a 5-3 delegation. Democrats have enough strength, and there's enough of us. We should have 3 votes in Congress, not 2. However, it seemed like the Democrats in the legislature were originally willing to go along with the 6-2 map because 6-2 was better than 7-1. Now there are all sorts of issues on the 6-2 map. The one change I'm watching very closely is if Onder and his people get their way, the 2nd congressional district will be centered on St. Charles County, but that's only 405,000 people. You have 1.3 million people between St. Louis City and county, which is about 85% of 2 districts. So what is possible could happen if the Conservative caucus gets their way is all of the 2nd district, all of St. Charles County in the 2nd district. That cuts down the portion of St. Louis County in the 2nd district. And you have a situation where to make the numbers work, it's possible that the southern flank of St. Louis County, in other words, Oakville, Afton, Melville, out to Sunset Hills, could wind up in the 3rd congressional district with Blaine Lichtenmeyer. And Blaine Lichtenmeyer is one of those guys who calls in the radio shows from his tractor. He'd be a great representative for the suburbs of St. Louis County. So any questions? Sorry to be so depressing. We're not even to Representative MacKey yet.
Yeah, there's a question. Lloyd, I think, had a question. No?
And Ian is here.
Ian is here, yeah.
Yeah, Glenn, I have a question about the changes to the ballot initiative process.
Mhm.
How likely are those to pass? And tell us a little bit more about that.
Right now, you can get something on the ballot if you have 8% of the voters in 6 congressional districts sign on to the petition. There are a bunch of proposals. The worst of them would require 10% from all 8 districts, which almost doubles the number of votes you need. It also means that you would have to work very hard in the very rural districts like the Northern District, Vicky Hartzler's area, or Blaine Lichtenmeyer's district, which is mostly farmland and a few suburbs. That has legs because the Republicans don't like us Democrats getting progressive things on the ballot, such as no on right to work, a state minimum wage, and expanding Medicaid. They don't want that to happen again. And there are a bunch of proposals. It'll be interesting because it appears that most of them would require a constitutional amendment and therefore have to go to voters. So that they would have to ask voters to give up their power. And I'm hoping that would be their stumbling block, that a lot of living Republicans aren't going to want to go to voters and say, we're taking away one of your basic rights in Missouri. One of the things Missouri is good at, allowing people to petition their government and do things that way, which has been especially important under the recent Republican administration. It has legs. The question is, will it get over the goal line, and will they be able to get it to a vote? But yes, that's very real, and there's like a bunch of proposals for that. And the worst is 10 and 8. 10% of the voters in the last gubernatorial election in all 8 congressional districts.
Okay, thanks, Glenn. I think Bob has a hand up. Is that, no, I'm sorry. No, he doesn't. All right, are there any other questions for Glenn? Ron, unmute yourself.
Yeah, what is the timeline on redistricting, as best we know?
They should have had it done before January 1st, so we're playing catch up. It appears the Senate's going to go to court, and who knows how long that'll take. It's looking more and more doubtful that we'll have clean lines for the Senate and for the congressional races by the time filing opens in a couple weeks. So once they miss that opening of filing, it becomes a crapshoot. Because the other problem we have is the congressional lines, when they passed the House, the emergency clause did not pass. They only had 2 extra votes to pass their congressional map, their 6-2 map in the House. They did not have the 2/3 they needed for the emergency clause. So the only way to get an emergency clause in the congressional is if they adopt a Senate version of that House map and vote an emergency clause on that. But I'm not sure the Senate with the conservative caucus would do that unless they get a map they want, which again would make all of St. Charles County in the 2nd district. And again, their goal would be a 7-1 map. And I don't think they're quite ready to give up on that, even though they're taking a hit.
Glenn, do you know if the county council districts and the county townships are set?
Townships are set and going to be announced soon. I was in court. I'm one of the reapportionment commissioners for the county, and we were in court on Tuesday in Magistrate Nanette Baker's courtroom. It's had to go to court because the Democrats and Republicans couldn't agree. Our map, which we preferred, only splits 9 of the municipalities in St. Louis County between 2 county council districts. Their map splits at least 31. And their map splits some municipalities in the 3rds. The Republican position was, that doesn't matter. It's not one of the 3 criteria in the county charter. We took the position, the county charter is the starting point. Yes, you have to have equal numbers. You have to have contiguous districts. In other words, you can't have 20 shapes, and you have to be compact. And we can't really change the numbering because of incumbents. We decided to not cut municipal lines. For example, there's a section in Florissant that is below Highway 270 that's been in a different county council district from the rest of Florissant for like 40 years. We undid that. We tried to do what we could in other areas to limit the damage, but that's now before Magistrate Nanette Baker. Professor David Kimball from UMSL liked our map better, and he was our expert. The Republicans did not bring an expert to the trial. So we're hoping to have the decision on that in the next couple of weeks. Again, that's on the same timeline for filing and for elections as the state offices.
Okay, it looks like there aren't any other questions. Thank you, Glenn. Great update. I see Ian has joined us. So again, we're very pleased that Representative Ian MacKey of the 87th District has made time to talk to us today. To talk about the education disputes going on both at local levels and in Jefferson City. I'm going to turn the floor over to you, Ian.
All right, thanks, Steve. Yeah, happy to be here. Thank you all for the invitation, and thanks for the ongoing work and discussions that your group is engaged in, and I'm glad we could connect. So yeah, I'm sure you've been following to some extent the drama in Jefferson City in terms of what's been going on in the Education Committee. We, our first hearing at the beginning of session back the first week of January, or second week of January, I guess, we got right to work. We got right off to it, hearing some of the most controversial and most harmful pieces of legislation around what the other side has dubbed anything, critical race theory, anything related to an equitable teaching and learning of history that is controversial or makes people feel sad. So we had a record number of folks who weighed in on that, who submitted testimony either online or who showed up to the hearing to offer their testimony. Online testimony amounted to 944 Missourians being against this legislation and 56 being in favor. And then we had folks who drove multiple, 2, 3, 4 hours to get to the Capitol, several from St. Louis County, several that I've been in touch with for a number of years, who drove in the pre-dawn hours to get down to Jefferson City, waited and gave their 2 or 3 minutes. And some of that testimony was absolutely compelling. I sent out an email last week to folks who were on my list with some clips of certain folks who testified. The 2 or 3 minute sound bites from those folks are just, right to the punch. It really made a difference. I try to get folks as often as I can to come to Jefferson City and sit down in front of a committee and testify, because it gives folks so much pause when it's done well and when it's done in large numbers. And that's exactly what we saw happen with this. So I had numerous conversations with colleagues of mine on the other side who, after that hearing and after the testimony that was sent in, already thought this was a bridge too far, this legislation. And after that, had even more pause. So we had several weeks, 4 or 5 weeks now, I guess, since that hearing before now the scheduled vote on that legislation. So we will take up House Bill 1995 and House Bill 1474 this coming Tuesday morning at 8 a.m. House Bill 1995 is Doug Ritchie's legislation that is the overall broad sweeping, don't teach anything that's controversial or makes kids feel bad. Let's give every parent in the district a heckler's veto. Let's make the district hire new employees and spend millions of dollars putting every piece of paper they have on the internet. And it just really just intended, I think, to create chaos across the state in all 537 districts. Nick Schwar's bill, House Bill 1474, is the specific outlaw of named curriculum. So critical race theory, we stories, teaching tolerance, all specifically banned by name in that legislation. And we had teachers who teach teaching tolerance come and testify. We had Laura Horowitz, who founded We Stories, come and testify. We had folks who, from both the perspective of a teacher and a student and a parent who've dealt with this curriculum, come and explain it, again, in 2 to 3 minutes. These folks didn't give lectures. They didn't have PowerPoints. They just really, in a powerful way, in 3 minutes, put out there why they knew best and how this legislation was going to harm them. And it was super, super impactful. And so we also will be hearing at that hearing, we'll continue the public hearing on Shamed Dogan's bill, which is, I always forget his bill number is House Bill 2428. Shamed, of course, has positioned himself as a moderate Republican. He's taken a lot of votes against his caucus over the years in Jefferson City, and he, of course, is running against Sam Page in the county executive race. Shamed has filed a bill that, from his perspective, I think, and from the perspective of others, attempts to say a lot and do nothing. I don't think it's quite that great of a bill. I wish that were where it was. I still think it risks having a grave chilling effect on teachers and on schools. But his bill, page 1, says that schools cannot compel teachers or students to engage in lessons that make them uncomfortable. So sort of similar to Doug Ritchie's bill. But then the second page of Shamed's bill says, this bill won't prevent anybody from having those conversations. So go and look for yourself. The bill language, page 1 and page 2, completely contradictory from the way I read it. But we'll continue to have that hearing on this Tuesday. I think Shamed's goal is to have his bill language carry the day so that folks can pat themselves on the back and say they did something about critical race theory, but not go as far as, following Representative Shore and outlawing specific curriculum by name, or going as far as Doug Ritchie and having a bill with, a multi-million-dollar fiscal note. So that's the optimistic view of where we're heading, if you can call it that, in the Education Committee. But I suspect, here in a few weeks, we'll start to see these conversations hit the floor. And there have been, the folks who've come to testify have really rallied around a group called Missouri Education Equity Partnership, which is headed up by a woman named Heather Fleming. She has been terrific in helping cobble together some folks who are coming at this from different angles and really putting forward a cohesive message against this. And she's been doing this at the local level as well, particularly in the Rockwood district. As legislators, we get emails from concerned Rockwood parents who won't identify themselves, but are just up in arms about all the great work Heather and her group are doing. And I hope and I suspect that her numbers will grow and that her organization will continue to grow, and that as this legislation begins to hit the floor and is voted out of committee, my hope is that we can have some successful lobbying days, days where folks come to Jefferson City and hold independent meetings with legislators, especially folks who live in West St. Louis County or who live in St. Charles County who have a Republican representative. I think it's critically important to get those 15-minute sit-down meetings in offices, or at the least to pull a member off of the floor and have that conversation in the rotunda. This is what folks have been doing this really successfully when it comes to issues like the anti-trans legislation we see each year. I think a huge reason why that has not moved in our state the way it's moved in other states is because of the successful in-person lobbying efforts. When you get somebody face-to-face and give a heartfelt story for a few moments, that really, you can change hearts and minds. It's not naive to think that you can do so. You really can. And so, especially when you've got somebody who's already, a lot of our folks in the suburban districts are already open-minded enough and willing to receive a message like that. And they do. So I hope that we'll see some more of that. And I hope that the Senate continues its dysfunction and nothing gets through there. That's a bigger, a bigger piece of optimism that all of us have. But that is sort of, that's the update from where I see it, but I'm more than happy to take questions from you all, which I'm sure some of you might have.
Yeah, Steve? I have a question.
Yeah, Don, go ahead.
So, I got an email on an event that Heather Fleming is presenting at, and are there any resource sites in terms of how to message on this issue and succinct analysis of how to counter the current arguments?
Yeah, Heather has really taken the lead on that and has done a fabulous job, I think. And the organization, I don't remember the URL, but it's MOEEP, Missouri Education Equity Partnership. That's the name of the organization, and I suspect if you Google that, the URL should pop up because they do have a website and they do have a Facebook page as well. And yeah, I would if you get an invitation to an event or if you find out about one, I certainly would encourage attending because I think she's doing a great job leading the messaging, and I think also is helping get folks connected who want to travel to Jefferson City and deliver that message in person.
Ian?
Thank you.
Yeah, I've been reading in outstate newspapers how a lot of the rural districts are dying because of the increased cost of gas and diesel. And yet we've always promised them more transportation money. But it appears from these articles that a lot of these rural districts are having to take money out of teacher salaries or other places to put gas in their vehicles. Is there any chance that the Republicans will realize these districts are in a bad state and increase either the transportation funding or the general funding? So a lot of these districts have kids on buses for an hour a day each way and probably using the equivalent of 1 gallon of diesel fuel per child per day. And that's just a huge amount of money they're putting out right now. Is there any move among the Republicans to help those rural districts? Because those are supposed to be their people.
Sure. Yeah, there is. There has been in the past, but it's always been the argument we don't have the money. That is not an argument for anything this year. You can say we're spending it on this instead, but you can't say we don't have it. We absolutely, like every state in the union this year, are flush with cash, billions of dollars in extra money. So, this would be the year to do it. Usually the education, the transportation line costs we're looking at, are usually asking for an extra, maybe $10 million at the most. So when we're talking about a budget surplus that we know is $3 billion, that could be as much as $8 billion. Come on. Yeah, we should absolutely be doing that. I think there will be a big push from rural public education folks on the other side of the aisle to do exactly that. I'm not on the budget committee, so I'm not intimately involved in those discussions on an ongoing basis, but I know that I would suspect that that's something we would see.
Jacqueline has a question.
Yeah, it's not a question. I just wanted to thank him for all his intelligent responses and redirecting some of the ignorant conversation that's come up in the hearings. It's really good to have a very intelligent backer of the hearings, because it's just too much ignorance out there. So thank you for being there.
Thank you, Jacqueline. I'm happy to do it, and it helps to have all the support like you all and folks who are getting as engaged. So thank you very much.
Susan.
Hi. I know that usually there's at least a dozen bills trying to expand charter schools statewide every year. And this year, those bills have been replaced with anti-CRT bills. But there still is at least one bill oriented toward expanding charter schools. And I've heard State Rep Peter Meredith say that he thinks it might pass this year because there are fewer representatives in the rural areas now who understand the harm that charter schools might do to their districts. Do you have an opinion on that?
Sure. So I haven't seen any movement on the charter expansion bills this year. And through my conversations with folks who advocate for that position, they don't appear particularly hopeful that they will get a charter bill expansion through either chamber. But there is a bill that we will be voting on probably next week or maybe in the next couple of weeks that relates to funding for charter schools. That relates to the disparity in the per student spending that charter schools receive versus public schools. And so we will be voting on that next week, I think. That is a bill that I and a handful of other Democrats, both in St. Louis and Kansas City, support for a number of reasons. I'm somebody who's opposed to charter school expansion, but I am somebody who supports providing funding for the 40% of kids in St. Louis and 50% of kids in Kansas City who currently attend a charter school. And I actually think it leaves Kansas City Public and St. Louis Public in a better economic position with less students and more money, with the offsets that have been put in place for the bill, for offsets such as funding for special education, of which public schools provide a great deal more than charter schools. So Kansas City has been negotiating on this bill for the last 3 years, and Kansas City public schools also support this bill. So the Kansas City Public School District supports this legislation, as do a number of pro-public school Democrats such as myself. The City of St. Louis Public Schools opposes it. And the city opposes it because they have been unwilling to negotiate the way that Kansas City has. Kansas City's been coming to the table for the last 3 years and has gotten to a position where this is economically beneficial to them. I really wish St. Louis would do the same. And I have pages of ongoing conversations marked on dates and times and stamps and conversations, negotiations that have been attempted and that have gone awry or not occurred that were supposed to occur. St. Louis has not been a good faith bargainer from my perspective on this, and from the perspective of Rasheed Aldridge, who represents a large portion of that district in the city. And so this, but that's not expansion. Again, that's fixed. That's a fix to kids who are currently in the system, and it offsets so that it leaves districts like Kansas City and St. Louis in better economic positions.
No, it does not. I live in the city. I oppose the bill. Rasheed Aldridge does not represent a large part of the district. He represents a small part of the district. You're going to be hearing from me.
Fair enough.
I'm going to be doing some of that one-on-one lobbying because it will do. They're looking to take $20 million away from the St. Louis Public School District. We already only get 30% of the transportation money that we're supposed to get because the legislature has been punishing the district for having magnet schools. And as far as special education is concerned, we are the only school that has, in the area, we don't have special school district like you do in the county. We pay for all our own special education, and we've got the expensive cases. The charter schools do not. So you and I you're going to hear from me because that's a horrible bill that is going to bleed the St. Louis Public School District like a vampire would. It does not belong being passed, and we're going to primary Rasheed and get him out of office. He's doing a horrible job representing his district.
Okay, Lloyd, do you have a question?
A follow-up about that bill. Does it include anything about holding the charters to the similar or the same standards as the public schools?
So our charter expansion bill did have the charter expansion bill that has been debated used to have, and I think that was one reason why it didn't pass because we could not get folks who were pro charter school expansion to agree to that. The funding bill is strictly a dollars bill. So it doesn't have any language in there in terms of changing the status quo as to regulations for charter schools versus traditional public schools. So this is simply a dollars and cents.
Jacqueline, did you have another question or comment or not?
Oh, no, I just forgot to take my hand down.
Okay. Ian, I have an opinion and a question. Parents' rights was a winning issue for Republican Youngkin in the Virginia governor's race. So the Republican legislation you've been talking about on CRT and the other stuff, that's an attack on parents' rights and the prerogatives of the local school boards as I see it. And this may be a little premature, but are Democrats using or prepared to use what Republican legislatures are doing to label Republicans as the party against parents' rights? And if not, why not? I would hate to see Republicans claim to be the party of parents' rights. That will hurt Democrats, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I agree. And, in terms of the local control piece, that has been an ongoing struggle for those of us who are trying to engage our partners who routinely show up to these education committee hearings, who walk the halls, who are paid to lobby on behalf of public school organizations, but who are sitting idle during this conversation. The number of conversations we have had with groups, for example, like the Missouri School Board Association, the Missouri School Administrators Association, they are silent through this. And it is increasingly frustrating to see them not come down on the side of local control. Our state school board association sent a letter to Washington, D.C. after the National Association called out Joe Biden and disagreed with with the Justice Department beginning to investigate violence at school boards. And they disassociated, the Missouri School Board disassociated from the national organization as a big middle finger to Joe Biden. But they are unwilling to get involved in these discussions that are leading and fueling the rhetoric and the violence toward our local school boards when it comes to these issues such as CRT or, quote, parents' rights. Even from the nonpartisan lens of local control, we're not asking them to weigh in and talk about what should or shouldn't be taught in the classroom. We're not asking them to use terms like equity education, which unfortunately has a partisan bent to it. We're asking them to sit down and advocate for what they claim, the whole reason they claim they exist, which is to support local control. And so far, they've been unwilling to do that. And that's incredibly frustrating.
Well, my concern is if we don't do the marketing, we being Democrats, we will lose on this issue.
Right.
We stand to lose on this issue as Republicans go and claim that mantle. And I just see that as a risk. Glenn?
Yeah, I agree, and that's part of being in a minority status, right? Is you're on defense, and so you're so often forced into the message and forced into the argument because you don't set the agenda, right? So Democrats in Jefferson City don't set the agenda. We do try our best to engage in proactive messaging. We do try our best to put our ideas forward and not just be a party of no or a party of trying to stop things. But being in the position where you've got 49 Democrats out of 163 members really puts you on the defense. But the point is well taken that we should, as often as we can, try to put forward a proactive and positive message. And I think that's, my mind circling back to Heather. I mean, I think that's what those groups are doing at the local level when they show up to these school board meetings, is really telling the story. And U City, by the way, the U City School District, I was just on I'm part of a group right now that had their first meeting last night to do a community read of the 1619 project, the New Origin expansion book. And so they are publicly taking this on and saying, we are a district that teaches the 1619 project, and here's what's great about it. And if you want to be a part of our discussion, join our read. There were 98 people on the Zoom last night who read the first chapter and had small group discussions and then heard from the superintendent. So, I think that there are folks who aren't shying away from this, who aren't back on their heels, but who are heading in, full steam ahead to say, as parents, there were a lot of parents on the call, as parents, as teachers, as community members, this is what we want our school to look like. And this is why what's going on in Jefferson City shouldn't dictate how we teach our kids here in, for example, University City.
Okay, thanks. Glenn?
My concern is we're going to have a situation like Texas where textbooks have to be approved by a central authority. And I could see some of the rural Republican legislators only looking at textbooks which are dumbed down so every child is above average, and also don't get into controversial subjects. And unfortunately, I could see that taking hold, especially in an election year, as campaign fodder for a bunch of these conservative caucus and other conservative Republicans saying, look, the easiest way to do this is to say, this is the approved 8th grade history book. This is the approved sophomore science book. Is that something we need to be on the lookout for? Or do you think the Republicans aren't together enough to come up with that on their own?
Well, I think it is something to look out for. It's not something we've seen filed that I know of. It's not something that's had a committee hearing, I'll say that. But as far as I mean, we have 2,000 bills that are filed. I haven't read all of them, so I hate to be that sure about it. But it's not something that has entered the conversation in the fray in terms of a committee chair deciding it's a good idea to take up. But certainly, that's an unfortunate scenario I could see playing out with somebody offering an amendment, for example, during this discussion on the floor. I think that's certainly possible. I think it's actually, even the numbers the way they are, like I mentioned, 49 Democrats, whatever their, resignations and whatever, 159 or whatever of them now, or however many there are, 159 total. it's still a tenuous situation. They still don't have overwhelming support for this legislation. And a lot of that is because we are a state that, I mean, I know it's sort of cliche, but really does have so much local control with 114 counties and 537 districts. I mean, that is just the geography footprint is so small and so local when you're talking about schools, that a lot of these folks, even the Republicans, the rural Republicans on the other side, are coming from a very pro-public school mindset, and are on their school boards, or they taught, or their spouse taught, or their kids teach, and so they're looking at it not quite the way we're looking at it, but we're not all that far apart when it comes to an issue like that, in terms of having a central agency telling you what you should say, what you should teach, what you should read. And I think it's to the point too where there are a lot of elected Republicans in Jefferson City that aren't Republicans anymore and that are out of touch with their base. I think you all know that. They're far right nationalists and fascists, some of them. And so when they bring that message home, that's how it's received to the folks back home who still are traditional conservative Republicans, who, like I said, don't want to be told what to do or what to teach, who have that sort of small c conservative mindset about the role of government. When their fascist legislator comes home and says, we're going to create a central agency that distributes textbooks, they say, you're gonna what? So there's a disconnect there too, that's and a wedge that really we on the left should be trying to take advantage of as much as possible.
Any other questions or comments for Representative MacKey? All right. Well, thank you again for coming in, and let's give a round of applause. Thank you for coming and letting us know what's going on.
Thank you all. I'm happy to anytime, and I'm happy to stay in touch after the meeting as much as anybody wants to. So I check my email regularly and happy to be in touch, and keep up the good work. Thanks, everybody.
Okay, thanks again. So that concludes, I think, what we had on our agenda for today. Is there any other topics or any other business that anybody wants to bring up? Ron?
I would like to compliment Susan Turk and Steve Reed for their letter to the editor in the Post-Dispatch, January 31st. I was proud to recognize their names and know that they're the newly re-elected leadership of this organization. So congratulations and thank you.
Oh, thank you, Ron. The Post-Dispatch in the past has not put on when I've submitted things with the MOPAG byline, they never published before. At least this time they published it. They also edited the letter to take out a reference to economist Joseph Stiglitz, and I think they made some other changes, but at least they published it. That was a letter asking for Cori Bush and Cleaver to sponsor legislation to in some way lessen the burden of student debt.
As the father of two, both in their 40s, who still have about half of their college debt hanging over them, I'm hoping in my lifetime at least, and certainly in theirs, something like this passes.
And the argument made was that this would be good for the economy, not just for the students, but good overall. All right, I meant to bring that up, Ron, so thanks for bringing that up. Glenn, did you want to say something?
Just remind people that the fight on Medicaid expansion is not yet over. In Oklahoma, in their first 3 months after they expanded Medicaid, and Oklahoma is just as conservative a state as Missouri at least, they got over 100,000 people enrolled in their program in a smaller state. In Missouri, more than half of those we've registered so far have been transfers from other components of Medicaid, primarily Medicaid coverage for pregnant women, not true adults coming in off the street and applying. Because of a shortage of help at DSS, it is very, very painfully slow for families who qualify, for adults who qualify to get Medicaid coverage. We are lagging on that. And again, we're also fighting a rear guard battle against taking that away. But the fight for Medicaid expansion isn't over. We need to encourage people to apply. That means they may be on the phone for 7 or 8 hours waiting for their call to be picked up when they call the call center. That's the reality we have in Missouri, but we have to keep the pressure on. We need to get more people covered by Medicaid. Remember too, this is so controversial. The Missouri Chamber of Commerce and Industry and the Missouri Restaurant Association both supported Medicaid expansion. It's another one of those radical communist ideas about Democrats.
Okay, thanks, Glenn. Any other final comments? In that case, I
Well,
move that we
if we're
adjourn.
finished.
Marty, did you have something?
Yes, Steve, yeah, well, we can adjourn the meeting. I ran into a problem and my computer froze up while Susan was going through the board members and voting for them. So to put into the minutes, so if everybody else wants to clear out, find out from you and Susan.
I'll work with you on that, Marty.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
So I move that we adjourn.
Second?
Second.
Okay. Ellen, Ron, all right. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, thanks all for attending. We'll see you next month. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Hold on.